Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Risk Takers Dream Makers platform. We're interviewing our interview series, and we are live tonight with Elizabeth Hardman Ricks. We are so happy to have her with us tonight. I am Andrea Kiesling, the co-founder of the Risk Takers Dream Makers project, along with Ann Barwick, who tonight is behind the scenes. She's on vacation at the beach tonight, so we'll try not to make her work too hard, but she's going to be managing the comments. So someone will be there and managing all that. If you want to jump in there, tell us where you're watching from, ask questions, anything like that. We'd love to have your participation. This series is designed to be interactive, so please feel free to show up in whatever way you like. The purpose of the Risk Takers Dream Makers project is to share and celebrate stories of women who are living the dream, like Elizabeth. We're going to hear her story in a minute, for the purpose of inspiring others to do the same. So we love hearing, sharing, celebrating stories of women that are living their dream. And by that, we just mean intentionally guiding their life to do whatever it is that they love and define as success. So if you are a risk taker dream maker, we'd love to hear your story. If you know a risk taker dream maker, please nominate them. You can do that through our Facebook page. We'd be happy to share their story as well. So tonight, as mentioned, Elizabeth Ricks is with us. Elizabeth is a risk taker dream maker. You can check and read her full story on our website. But Elizabeth is a first mom of two young boys. She is with tell me, Elizabeth,
Storytelling with data.
Storytelling with data. There we go. She's a resident of Charlotte, and she has a really incredible story. So Elizabeth, I would love to just start by you talking to us about, who you are, where you came from, and how you ended up with storytelling with data. And then we're going to get into a lot of other topics. We've got a lot to cover tonight, so we're excited to jump in. So Elizabeth, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea and Ann, for having me, and hello to everyone who's tuning in. This is a really cool community to be a part of, and I love the mission of Risk Takers Dream Makers, because I think it is, the definition of living the dream is so specific to the individual person. And I consider, living my dream just being able to be intentional and purposeful about how I spend my time, both personally and professionally. So it's cool to be a part of this community and be able to inspire others to do the same thing. So as you heard from Andrea, I currently work for a company called Storytelling with Data. I'm based here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we are a team of very small number of people scattered across the United States. And what we do is we teach others how to communicate with data in a way that makes sense. So it's partly designing graphs, and then also being able to explain those graphs in a manner that somebody else can understand. Now, this is something I'm very passionate about helping people learn, because this was something that I once struggled with in my own career and failed horribly at, and suddenly realized, okay, there's got to be a better way. So taking you back a couple years, after I graduated college, I had a number of different roles. I started out in pharmaceutical sales. I did that for a couple years, loved that sort of interaction of working with people and getting to know my customers and solving problems and working as part of a team. But really felt that there was part of me that was really more interested in the business planning and the marketing side of things. So I left pharmaceutical sales and got into, at the time it was called business intelligence, which is now, it's kind of evolved into this whole field of business analytics. So I went back to graduate school, got my degree there, and came out graduating from workplace just thinking, okay, so now I understand how to analyze data. I'm going to just solve everybody's problems. So I went into my first postgraduate career at a large financial institution, and was working with a ton of different data projects, anything from, analyzing sales trends to doing financial analysis to doing people, headcount, territory optimization, those sort of things. And at first it was the type of role that I really loved. So, I'm a very analytical, methodical person. And to me, there's just something fun about digging into a bunch of data to figure out what's the interesting thing that somebody's eventually going to care about. But over time, I started to get really frustrated with my job, because I would do all of this work. I would spend a ton of time working on my graphs, my presentations, and then I would go to share it with my business partners. And I would hear things like, oh, well, that's interesting. Thank you, Elizabeth. And they would move on. Or then they would start asking me for more data and more data and more data. And soon enough, I found myself in this kind of cycle of what we call analysis paralysis, where I was just pushing and nothing was really happening. And that was so frustrating to me to not only see all the hard work that I was doing, but the people on my team that were also doing it, because, there's a ton of things that go into getting data into a graph, from, the data warehouses, the things that the structures that keep our data, to the people pulling it out of it, to people doing analysis, to realize, nothing's happening. So I did a little self-reflection, and what I found was part of the problem was me and the way that I was communicating with the data. Because there is so much work that goes into it, the challenge is when we go to actually share it with somebody else, we tend to completely forget that that person, doesn't live in our heads. And we have to take intentional steps to make our data make sense to somebody else who doesn't have that background and that context that we have. So I was getting really frustrated, and I thought, okay, surely I can't be the only one that's struggling with this. There's got to be somebody else out there who's figured this out. So I did a little bit of research, and I found a company called Storytelling with Data, which I now actually work for. And there was a blog, there were some books, and sure enough, found out that this company actually taught a workshop. So I convinced my manager at the company I was working for at the time to say, I feel like we need help here. Like, help us. This is something we really need to invest in. And so we brought the company in, did some workshops, and I started noticing after I got better at this, that my conversations were changing. I was being invited to more meetings. I was being asked to be more part of important projects that were happening, and I was actually getting better at communicating. And so there was an interesting point in my life where there was this convergence around, wow, like, I've learned something really cool, and not a lot of people know how to do this. And it's actually not that hard to learn once you learn the basics. And there's this huge need, and maybe this is something I should think about, doing full time, because I really enjoy teaching other people and connecting with others and solving problems. And so this whole sort of revelation kind of emerged around the same time that my first son was born. So he at the time. And I remember I went back from maternity leave and really just kind of felt like, I was really good at my job and I had a lot of success, but it just felt like if I was going to have, a career outside the home, it had to be purposeful and it had to be intentional. And I really had to make sure that what I was doing was changing things and solving the problems. So very long story short here, I ended up reaching out to the woman who's now my coworker, who founded Storytelling with Data, and basically said, you don't know me, but I participated in your workshop and I've had fantastic success. And I'm totally curious if you'd be interested in hiring other people, because I would love to partner up and join and help teach what you do. And sure enough, she was actually looking to hire someone. So she'd never hired anyone before. I had never worked for, a team of 2 people before. So we were a little bit in a kind of a risk-taking situation, if you will. So we worked together on some couple side projects for a while and just try to feel things out, how would this work? And then soon enough, it became clear that we worked really well together, and there was enough interest for what we do that it made sense for me to leave Bank of America, who I worked for at the time, and joined Storytelling with Data. So here we are. That's my story, and that's what I do now. Is I primarily teach workshops and do one-on-one feedback sessions, consulting sessions with individuals through our website. And basically, what I like to say is we just help people design graphs that make sense. And there's so much data out there that it seems like data is not going away. And this is something that more and more people are finding themselves, they're being asked to do things with data in their role, and they maybe haven't had any sort of formal training. So it's really fun to get to be a part of this whole just sort of awareness we're having around the power of data. So.
Yeah, and I've actually had the pleasure of being at one of your workshops, Elizabeth, and I can definitely hear the passion in your voice. And you have a gift at being able to explain data in a way that I certainly can. I don't know if that's something that comes with most people, but it's clear that you love what you do.
Yeah, I disagree with you there. It's a gift, but it's only because It's surprisingly very easy to learn. And it was something that I was not good at. And I would have never thought that anybody would actually say that to me, just thinking back to how much I struggled. But,
Yeah.
it really comes back to anytime you communicate with something, it's just thinking about who's the other person that's going to be looking at what you're sharing. And it's not specific to data. It's thinking about, who are they? What do they care about? What motivates them, what keeps them up at night. So it's more about just the communication, and data is just one tiny piece of that.
Yeah.
So,
And you're right. I like the point you made about, the other person doesn't live in your head. And I think that we oftentimes assume that everyone else is on the same page as we are. So, to your point, it's not just about data necessarily, but communication in general. So these are kind of basic skills. But anyway, definitely very relevant and important. So one thing you mentioned, Elizabeth, you obviously are in your dream role, but you took a risk of making, you jumped ship from a comfy corporate role into a very, as it was a risk. It was kind of a startup. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And just took a chance on asking. And in your RTDM story, you talked about how you straight up asked. So I think we should spend some time right there, because wanting something and making it happen, those are two very different things. And actually, like bridging that is where a lot of our, people, it just doesn't happen. So talk about what led up to you just saying, you know what, at what point am I just, I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to ask the question. What led up to you going for it?
Yeah, my coworkers love this story because they feel like I kind of paved the way. And now that they all have jobs, they love to hear me tell this over and over. And I really wished I had a great story. I was sitting at my desk one day, the clouds just parted, and like the answer was there. But I think it was really just, kind of struggling for thinking about, what am I really good at? How do I want to spend my time? How can I be more purposeful and intention in the time that I spend away from my son? And thinking about, I think it came actually down to, what strengths do I have? Who has a problem that I can help solve? So I think when I connected those two things, the answer to me was pretty clear. I should reach out to Cole, who's the founder of our company and who did our workshop. And I should mention, I kind of glossed over her background a little bit at the time, or she was, at the time, a very well-known author, had published a lot of books on this subject and was kind of really well-known in the field. So it was a little bit of risk for me to reach out to her. It wasn't just, somebody who was just kind of, I found on LinkedIn. It was actually a really well-known thought leader in my field. And so I think, I wish I had a great story, but it was just thinking about, she has a great thing going. She needs help. Maybe that could be me. And I think it's just being willing to put yourself out there and recognize that you might hear no, but that's okay. And, the worst thing she could have said is no, or not responded to me at all. I should say, I was a little creative in my approach when I reached out to her. So I didn't just, send her my resume and say, hey, I'd love to work together. Let me know what you think, because, I'm sure everybody does that. So I realized, if I'm going to show her that I can help her, pull her message forward and be more impactful, I actually have to show her that I can do that in my approach. So this is kind of, okay, so maybe there is a funny story here. So, so I actually looked at my resume and I, was struggling with, I felt like my resume didn't really get across what I was good at, like how effectively I could take information and kind of get it across. So I actually took parts of my resume in charts. And then I made my resume into a story, which is almost everything, we teach in our workshops. And then I sent that to her. I said, I totally applied what I've learned in your workshop to my resume. And I'm totally curious if you could give me some feedback on it. And oh, by the way, are you interested in working together? So it was a little bit of a creative approach to get there. And that's actually something I would give as advice to anyone who's, a little unsure about how to take the next step, is not only take it, but also just, kind of going back to what we were talking about, know who you're reaching out to and know what's going to get their attention and what that person is going to care about, and kind of frame your message and craft your message in a way that they're going to want to pay attention to it, because you've given some thought into what it is that person is thinking about. So
I love that. I didn't know that the story, and that definitely makes it a little more interesting. You're right. That's super creative. And I'm sure that, someone like her probably, like you mentioned, gets these types of generic messages all the time. So what a wonderful way to capture her attention. So
Yeah. And another thing I'll point out too is I didn't really have her contact information, so I had to get creative and being able to get directly to her. And that's actually a piece of advice I'll give to anyone, kind of if you're in a situation where you want to reach out to someone but you don't have their direct information, it's actually not that hard to find people's contact information. So there's a fine line between some stalking that you can do, but
yeah.
if you can figure out, the email naming convention for a company, and you can be creative about playing for a couple different ways, you can actually contact people without directly
It's a
having
topic for another workshop, maybe.
yeah creative internet stalking, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I guess, in my approach, I was kind of like, I bet her email is cole@storytellingwithdata.com. And sure enough, it was. And it was,
Yeah.
it's just, so what? Yeah.
That's funny. Well, it's interesting because a lot of times we ask people that we're interviewing about the risk of, of taking a risk and what are the consequences of that. And oftentimes people say that the real risk involved was not taking a risk, right? And just staying complacent, staying where you are, not necessarily enjoying the place that you're in, but keep letting that fear win, right? Of keeping you in the place that you are. So maybe that was a piece of it that, would you say that kind of motivated you as well?
Definitely. Yeah, because there's always, with risk, there comes, you have to think about, what are the alternatives?
Yeah.
And for me, that's always been something that's really easy to think about. Okay, there's risks with literally everything we do, but what is the alternative to not doing this? And I had a pretty good understanding of what the alternative was because I had worked at my organization for so long, and I kind of knew what the career paths were and what the opportunities were. And you're right. I was in a position where I had a fantastic job. I loved my team, loved my manager. I was on a really, really, really good path, but I just felt like there was a better path. And it was almost like, if I knew what I was going to get if I went this direction, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to get if this direction, but then it could also bridge off into so many different ways. And it could, it's just almost kind of just being open to what other opportunities come your way too. And just kind of accepting uncertainty, if you will. And that's hard to do. I know that's really hard to do, particularly when you're in the situation where you've got families and jobs and different dual income or dual parents and people's different roles and things like that. So we were lucky that we were in a position that I could be a little more risky with my job, and it's worked out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool story. So you touched on some of the reasons why it was time in your life to make this shift. And that was around the question of what success meant to you. And so you said how your definition of success has kind of evolved a bit over time. And it included, I'm reading from your risk takers interview, or story rather, how you said it needed to be both fulfillment at your career and feeling purposeful in what you did in combination with a work-life balance. So talk a little bit about your definition of success, why it evolved there, and just how you're experiencing that kind of success now.
Yeah. So I think, thinking back to when I was in college, to me, success seems so abstract. Like it seemed like there was a really defined path for success. You have a specific title, or you have a specific salary, or you're on like a track. And, I think maybe a little bit of that was just being young and sort of not experiencing the world. And that's, one path, certainly. But I think also, in the time that, I've been in college, we've had incredible changes happen in the world from 9/11 happened, and then the financial crisis, and then now we're in this new crisis that we're all trying to make use of. And I think with all of these sort of major things that you experience through life, it all ends up presenting you opportunities that you have to kind of think about. I could continue to do this, or I could not continue to do this. And I think personally, when you have children, that presents one of these opportunities around what does this mean for the change in my life, and how am I going to be able to, both do things that I enjoy and then also be mentally present for these, tiny humans that I'm now accountable for raising. Right. So I think, to me in college, success was a specific salary range or a title, but over time and experience, I started to realize I think there's more to it than that, for me at least. and it was how I actually spent my time, and being able to choose how I spend my time is now how I define success. And I do that both with, I'm wonderfully blessed to work for a company that values work-life balance. And so, what do I mean by that? It's, we aren't tied to a specific, location. It's just, we kind of have the opportunity of, work wherever you need to get your work done. There's not a lot of, sort of constraints on you. It's all about where, I have a good team that I work with, and we all trust each other to get the job done. So I think when you work with people who kind of have that mentality, that it's more about what's the goal that we're trying to work towards, it allows you to have a little bit more of that work-life balance, where you can, be intentional about how you spend your time and when you work and when you don't work. And really, it's more about fitting work and sort of the rhythms of life, because we all have this sort of ebb and flow of when we really, have a ton of energy, both during the day and during the week and during the month, just given the challenges of parenting and, managing jobs and things like that. So I think for me, success is not necessarily a salary or a title anymore. It's just being able to, choose how I spend my time, which is really cool. So
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
So, yeah, and actually, I actually think that's a silver lining that's come out of this pandemic that we're in, is I think a lot more companies have been forced to recognize that work can be done pretty much from anywhere, right? And I love seeing that happen, because I've worked for so many companies that I think have recognized that already and can see, the value of just letting employees work whenever they want to, as long as you have specific constraints and get your job done. So it's really cool for me to watch other companies kind of come to that realization that, work can just be wherever you are, whenever you are. And it's more about working towards a common mission, which is cool, because I think it takes more people back to what problems are we trying to solve, rather than you have to sit at this desk from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock and you take a lunch at 1 o'clock and those sort of things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think you're right. I'm seeing that as well, where companies are being more intentional about how their employees spend time, since they may have more responsibilities with children out of school and that kind of thing. So everybody's kind of being more intentional with their time. Which has been a great, something good that's come out of this. So kind of transitioning a little bit, speaking of work-life balance, we know that you have 2 little ones, managing, trying to work from home, stay on top of it all. How are you doing it?
So I will say that while I work from home, my children are not at home all day. And I think that's a very critical thing to understand. And I think the expectation of parents having children in their home, being full-time caregivers and also working a full-time job, is completely unrealistic. And I hate that we're in this situation where people are expected to do all of these things. And I don't think anybody is doing this well. So I think that is one piece of it, is, working from home for me has been successful, because I also have full-time childcare help in that my children are in daycare, so they're not actually home during the day. And so I know I have a lot of friends who are, struggling with this right now, where they don't have that, their daycares are closed or their schools are closed or those sort of things. And I wish I had the answer for you. I really do, but I don't. I understand and really can appreciate the position you're in. And I think parents of the pandemic are the heroes. We talk about the frontline workers and things like that, and those people who are directly dealing with COVID are fantastic. But when we look back on this time in life too, it's almost like the parents that had to be teachers and provide for their families and raise the next generation. It's just, it's an incredible group of people that are doing this, men and women. So
Sure. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. We've been called to, this has been a character developing experience. I'll distill it down to that.
Yes.
It's been an interesting scenario. So Elizabeth, I know this might be a tough question for you, because I don't want to oversimplify it, and there's so many things that you do, but if you could give us a couple tips on how to make sense of data, what would maybe be, I don't know, a few things that would be helpful to people like me who don't necessarily work with data and analytics on a regular basis, but still see graphs and charts, and just how could the normal person implement some of these things in their life?
Yeah, so I love this question. And I think to start off, I want to separate between, you're the person who has put the data into the graph, and
Mhm.
you're the person who is either looking at the graph or is taking that graph that you created and sharing it with someone else. Because those are two completely different things. And I talked about, kind of letting go of the fact that when I give a graph to somebody else, that person doesn't live in my head. And I have to make sure it makes sense to them
Yeah.
doing a lot of things. So I think when you're in that position where you've created a graph and you're giving it to someone else, the number one thing that you can do to make your data make sense is actually put your takeaway in words and be able to clearly state what somebody should take away from the graph or what you're going to be showing them. And I always like to tell people, if you cannot clearly articulate what that is, you should probably think about, do I even need to share this in the first place? Because
Oh,
it sounds completely obvious, but I mean, there is so much data all the time. And I mean, you turn on the news and you see it in the newspapers and now in our news feeds. And, if we're in a situation where we're just putting data and graphs out there and expecting people to know what to do with it, the challenge is they don't typically do anything at all, right? And then we've lost our ability to communicate effectively. So when you're in the situation where there is something specific that you want somebody to take away from it, actually put it in words. And not only put it in words, but put the words in a very prominent place, either at the top of the graph or in the graph as close as possible to the data that they describe. So that would be one tip, is don't underestimate the importance of words. And then the other tip I would say is use color very sparingly in your graphs. And you've been in some of my sessions, so I kind of demonstrate how powerful color can be, because I think sometimes we think, oh, let's use a bunch of color. That'll make it pretty. That'll make people want to pay attention to it. But the challenge is when we use every single crayon in the toolbox, then, nothing really stands out. So if you've taken the time to think about, this is the interesting thing I want to highlight, and then if you make everything else a neutral color and make that one thing stand out, then that just reinforces the words that you're putting behind your graphs. So those two things alone go a long way in just making your graphs make more sense. So that would be
yeah,
my encouraging. If you don't do anything else, those two things will go a longer way than you think it will. Yeah.
that's
And
good
then if
advice.
you're also, yeah, I was gonna say, if you're also in the situation where you're not creating the graph, but you're being asked to look at them or do things with them or create them, I think there's things that you can do to help the person giving you the graph be more effective at their job. Something I look for anytime I see data or graphs is are axes labeled? Is it clearly displayed what's being shown? Is there a chart title? Just being really clear, making sure the person has been very explicit about what's being shown in the graph. And again, that comes back to, we don't intentionally forget to put those things there. It's just we think it's really obvious what's being shown, but oftentimes it isn't, right? And
Yeah.
so, if you're not entirely sure what it is, ask the person, like, what is this? Help talk me through. And then that'll actually force them to realize, okay, there's some things I missed. There's some things I forgot to put here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really those are good tips. Anne is going to put all of this stuff in the comments. Actually, I see that she already has. So if anyone's following along, there's a really good summary there. So you've got that. Okay, Elizabeth, as we're wrapping up, I would like to ask you one last question, which is, if you could leave our viewers with just one final bit of wisdom, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I knew you were gonna ask me this question. I still, I
Pick one.
still, yeah, I think recognizing that opportunities are there if you pay attention to them.
Mhm.
And I say that meaning, always be thinking about what are your next steps or where you want to be, and being open to taking opportunities that may not look at first like they might get you there, but they might also allow you to meet somebody else or develop a specific skill. And I think what you'll find when you kind of be a little more open to pushing yourself and trying new things is opportunities will just come your way, that you may not be even be looking for. So I
Mhm.
think it's just being aware of trying things and not being scared of, okay, well, I've never done that before. I don't know if that's something I want to do. And just always be trying to learn new skills, because the worst place you want to do is just kind of be sitting in the same place. You want to continue to develop yourself and meet new people and try new things, and look for opportunities too. And I say that because I think these sort of big life events are great opportunities to reevaluate, how your life is going, whether it's you've just had your first child, or maybe your second child, or your third child, or, we're in this global pandemic and now all of a sudden everybody has a blanket excuse to kind of reevaluate how things are going and where things are not working. So just kind of being open to when things like this happen and pay attention to opportunities that may pop up and be willing to kind of jump on them when you see them. So,
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. And I lied because I have one more question.
okay.
How can we contact you, or what would be a good place to follow you? Just give us a couple places that we can get in touch with you and find you.
Yeah, so the best place to follow me is on LinkedIn. You can search for me, Elizabeth Ricks, or actually I think it's Elizabeth Hardman Ricks. I'm sure we'll provide a link to this. So that's a great place to follow me from a professional standpoint. I'm always sharing things like I talked about here tonight. And if you're interested in the actual work that we do, I'll point you to our website, storytellingwithdata.com. It's a fantastic place to find anything related to designing graphs that make more sense. So we have a monthly blog. We have Elizabeth Ricks, or actually I think it's Elizabeth Hardman Ricks. Yeah, I think that's right. So we have a blog, we have a community site, we have a lot of free resources that are out there for the person, who's been doing this a while and just needs some help, to the person like, yourself, who's just like, I don't have a data and analytics background, but I do have to do things with graphs every now and then. So I think there's a ton of resources out there that people can find useful for whatever pieces of this they may touch. So.
Yeah, well, Elizabeth, this was really enlightening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and doing this and sharing more about your story and what you do and how you arrived in this place. We appreciate your time, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.